Hey everybody, Mr. The Fanboy here, back for another video, and I meant to do this earlier, but I took a nap. This is my salute of New Japan Pro Wrestling. I did a previous video of me talking about all of Japanese wrestling. Well, this is me talking about each of the Japanese wrestling companies individually, and the first one I'm going to start off with is right now currently the biggest and best one, New Japan Pro Wrestling. Well, I've always thought in the past that All Japan Pro Wrestling, FMW, and yeah, and Noah, and of course UWF International and the various shoot fighting organizations were much better than New Japan. Right now, currently, New Japan Pro Wrestling is the best. Noah is still good. Noah is still good. However, I think they haven't been the same since Kenta left. All Japan Pro Wrestling was once one of the biggest promotions in Japan, but in more recent events has become something of an indie promotion. Indie promotion, and of course you got Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. That's supposed to have made a comeback. That's supposed to have made a comeback, but I've not watched anything from the revived version of that promotion. I've not watched anything from the revived version of that promotion, and of course the various shoot fighting organizations I mentioned. Well, Pancrase is now an MMA organization, and the other and UF International, they don't exist anymore because shoot wrestling or shoot fighting has lost out to Rio lost out to MMA. So yeah, but like I said, so right now with the roster they have, New Japan is currently the best wrestling promotion in Japan currently right now, and I think yeah, in this video I'm going to give my history with New Japan and talking about New Japan over the years, the various different wrestlers, and my thoughts on New Japan currently. With that being said, of course, like I said in my salute of Japanese professional wrestling, I got into New Japan and Japanese wrestling in general with the Aki wrestling video game wrestling series, and the very first one I played was WCW versus the World and on that game, if you on that game, now like I said, while the core roster, which was Hogan, Sting, Luger, Flair, Ultimo Dragon, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and of course as a hidden character, Jeff Jarrett. While I knew who all of those guys were, the bunch of hidden characters and the other characters in the game, they all had different names. They all had different names because America couldn't secure the rights to those names, so when they came here they changed a bunch of those names, such as, like I said, if you beat the Empire Wrestling Federation, which was All Japan, which the organizations were fictional too. If you beat the Empire Wrestling Federation League, you get which was really All Japan Pro Wrestling. You get Major Tom, who of course Major Tom was Terry Funk. And then if you beat the I think it was the Independent Wrestling Union. If you beat that league, you get a guy named Steel Stallone who was the legendary late Giant Baba, the guy from All Japan Pro Wrestling, and and I keep forgetting what they called him, but Tiger Mask. Tiger Mask, King Jaguar, who was actually in real life Tiger Mask, the real life Satoru Satama Tiger Mask. So that was my introduction to New Japan, Japanese wrestling, and other wrestling organizations in general, because it had wrestlers from all over. It had wrestlers from all over the world. But that's also when I learned that there was other wrestling besides the WWE and of course the WCW, which had just went defunct. Besides the WCW and the ECW, which had both just went defunct. There's a whole different universe of wrestling out there. So yeah, like I said, I'm back in the early to mid 2000s. Like I said, my first introduction to Japanese wrestling was the video game, but I didn't really get into Japanese wrestling until the early 2000s when I heard stories of guys like Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero's, and Hulk Hogan's and Terry Funk's and the late Bam Bam Gordy. When I heard their legendary stories, Bam Bam Terry Gordy, legendary stories in Japan, and I purchased the Chris Benoit Hard Knocks DVD, which I still got here, and I gotta watch and review sometime. When I purchased on the DVD as part of the extras, they have 3 of his matches with Japan. They have his first match where he was in a mask, and they called him Flying Pegasus, I think. Flying Pegasus, where he had a blue mask and he wrestled Jushin Thunder Liger. Then next he got rid of the mask and became Wild Pegasus, and he used variations of this gimmick throughout his career. And this is where he worked a match. This is where he worked and met Eddie Guerrero. Who was wrestling as Black Tiger, the fictional nemesis of the Tiger Mask character. Then, of course, they had a match with the Shinobi character, Great Sasuke, who was black belt in WCW versus the World, WCW versus the World. So, yeah, like I said, this is where I got into it. And also around this time, I would also have a magazine called PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which I used to buy all the time. And in 2004, one of the best years in wrestling, in my opinion, 2004. I heard stories of Bob Sapp, the MMA fighter and K1 fighter, a African American, defeating Great Muta for the IWGP heavyweight championship, and then I also read other stuff like rumors of Goldberg returning there. Who they showed a picture of him wrestling. Who was he wrestling? I think he was wrestling Brian Adams. They showed a picture of him wrestling Brian Adams in Japan. It was rumored that since Goldberg left WWE, he would be going back there, but of course that never happened. That never happened. Then also around this same time, this is where stuff like streaming websites where you can stream matches and shows from other you can download and stream stuff from other wrestlers from the independents in other countries, and this is also around this time when I heard about Brock Lesnar, where he went to when he left WWE, he went to Japan for a while. He had this badass cool red attire, and he called his F5 the Verdict because he couldn't use that move. And he went there and quickly became the IWPG Heavyweight Championship, and he feuded with guys like Nagata and Mashiro Chono, yeah, hearing legendary stories. Then of course I mentioned Mick Foley's in his book, him talking about his death matches with Terry Funk, which I finally got to see in, I think it was 2005 or 6. Well, first off, the match was awesome as expected, but I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't as violent as I thought it was. See, when Mick Foley, he said, a friend of mine had the book. I didn't have the book. When a friend of mine was talking about the book, Mick Foley said explosive. When he said explosive, I'm thinking dynamite. But no, he was talking about firecrackers tied to barbed wire and stuff. Tied to barbed wire and stuff. That's what Mick Foley was talking about in the match, his death matches with Terry Funk and Bam Bam Terry Gordy. The late Bam Bam Terry Gordy was awesome. Speaking of Bam Bam Bigelow's. I had always wanted to see a match between Bigelow and the late Bam Bam Bigelow and of course Big Van Vader. It happened. It already happened in Japan. It already happened in Japan. It wasn't the best match ever, but seeing those two guys in the ring, two wrestlers I've always wanted to see wrestle, was good. And of course then of course you had other wrestlers like Ludwig Borga, Tony Holm, who was a boxer and competed in the early UFC, competed in the early UFC against Randy Couture. I think he was Randy Couture's first match, Randy Couture's first fight, and of course legendary Scott Norton, who was just a mid-carder, who was just an undercarder here in WCW in America. In Japan, he was one of the main stars there, capturing the IWPG Heavyweight Championship numerous times. You should have saw the pop he got when he came out in the Battle Royal. So, but like I said, one of the things I always loved about New Japan and Japanese wrestling was giving wrestlers in America who were misused a second chance at wrestling at the big time, because New Japan is one of the biggest promotions in the world besides WWE. One of the biggest promotions. I think it's the second biggest promotion in the world behind WWE. Yeah, they even took Albert, who was never really that good. He had a good run on SmackDown in 2003, in my opinion, as a top heel, as a mid-card heel on SmackDown. But yet Albert, who was never really that good, New Japan took him and renamed him Giant Bernard and turned him into one of their biggest stars, one of their big stars. He had awesome matches, awesome fights with Lesnar, So yeah, Mark Jindrak, before he went to Mexico and became a star there, he stopped in New Japan where he was an undercarder, but he picked up a surprise win against one of the veteran characters. So was Matt Morgan. Who went to New Japan before he stopped. He was stopped by New Japan before he went to TNA. Before he went to TNA. Then of course like I said, then of course before I get to Hogan, hearing about his legendary stories in Japan and seeing a completely different Hogan. See, I've always thought Hogan was Hogan in WWE, he was good character-wise, but not wrestling-wise. I always thought Hogan was better in the territories, WCW, and finally Japan, where they let him wrestle. I was completely surprised by Hogan. In the WWE, whenever you watch a Hogan match, you get a couple of punches, a big boot, and maybe sometimes a body slam or here, a throw here or two, but mostly punches, a big boot, and a crappy leg drop to end the what's his name. Here in Japan, you get mat wrestling, in more intense brawling. Instead of the leg drop, you get a clothesline, which was his finisher. I think he called it the axe bomber. The clothesline, and of course you got body slams. I'm talking belly to bellies, German suplexes, and other various slams, and of course you get an enziguri, which he did in his fight with Great Muta. Yeah, like I said, Hogan had some awesome fights with Inoki, Abdullah the Butcher. I remember a tag team match where he teamed up with Junichi Tenryu taking on the Road Warriors, which is on the Road Warriors DVD. Where Hawk, one of the things I always thought was cool, where Hawk press slammed Hogan of all people. And then of course you got what else? Then his match with Great Muta. Then I remember he also came back in the early 2000s and wrestled a pretty good match. He was past his prime by this point, so that cool work rate he had was gone, but he wrestled a good match with Mashiro Chono. So yeah, some of Hogan's best work was there. The Funks, having several legendary matches there. Funks, his legendary death matches I mentioned with Mick Foley, The Sheik, the Sheik and Terry Funk. I would later learn that's where Dean Malenko picked up the Texas Cloverleaf. Texas Cloverleaf. Terry Funk is the inventor of that maneuver, but Dean Malenko borrowed it from him. I thought Dean Malenko created it, but Dean Malenko's from Florida. So yeah, and I mentioned, yeah, Dean Malenko. He was another wrestler there who was he was a mid carder, a top mid carder in WCW, and one of the major stars in Japan. He was a jobber in WWE. Perry Saturn, seeing him there. There was another wrestler, like I said, I like the late Renegade Rick Williams, who had a gimmick similar to the Warrior, but in Japan he had Leo the Jungle, I think a stripper gimmick, which I thought that gimmick was much better than him being a Warrior clone in WCW. Some of his best work there. He wrestled in an offshoot of New Japan called Wrestling War and Romance, which is where Jericho and Lance Storm also wrestled. Yeah, like I said, Jericho. Love his work. Now, currently in WWE, he's one of the best. Actually, he is the best wrestler in WWE right now. He's one of the best wrestlers in WWE right now. But I thought his '90s stuff with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, New Japan, CMLL, and of course ECW and finally WCW was his best work. Was his best work in terms of wrestling and character. He became more entertaining in WWE with the Y2J character and the current character he has now, the Cold Breaker short hair Jericho, which I think that's Jericho at his best, the Jericho now. Um, so yeah so so yeah yeah, then of course like I said in the early 2000s, like I said in my salute of Japanese wrestling, WWE was never really a WWE fan. When WCW was around, I watched more WCW. The wrestling and stuff, and the characters and their storylines and stuff were much more interesting. I'm not gonna say better, but were much more interesting than what was going on in the WWE. The only reason I watched WWE was Stone Cold, The Rock, and several of the wrestlers that were featured during that period. Period. And then of course in the early 2000s when it was gone, I had no choice but to watch WWE. And this is when I slowly became a WWE fan, going back in history and learning more about that company. So, but yes, but like I said, I was never really a WWE fan. I liked the top guys, Hogan, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, Bret Hart, Shawn, The Rock, Stone Cold, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and when these guys left or died, yeah, I kind of stopped following WWE. And then when I saw these new promotions, World Wrestling All Stars, the first one to try it, then of course TNA, I started becoming more interested in those promotions. So I'm not a one wrestling company guy, and I was never really a WWE. Never really was a WWE fan. So seeing all this so yeah, Japanese. I was instantly a fan of Japanese wrestling, and another thing that contributed to my fan of Japanese wrestling, like I said at that time, I still believed wrestling was real. As a kid and as a teenager, I used to confuse wrestling with real life, and I thought WWE was fake. But all of these indie promotions, all of these indie promotions, TNA international promotions, because of how seriously they took wrestling, I used to think they were real. WWE, even though I used to believe wrestling was real as a child, WWE, it never looked real to me. It always looked like a show. It always looked set up. It never looked like pro wrestling to me. It never looked real. There were key wrestlers there who had me believing it was real, but the WWE never convinced me that this was ever WWE never convinced me this was ever real. New Japan, because of how seriously they took their wrestlers, and unlike here in America where you have promos, in New Japan you have promos, but the promos are similar to the interviews you see in boxing and MMA and other sports and various other sports. You don't see the characters acting like their persona, no matter how exaggerated or over the top their gimmick is. The gimmick is you don't see them acting like their characters. You have Muda dressed like what I keep forgetting what Great Muda's gimmick original was, but you don't see him acting that way in his promos. He still talks and acts he still talked and acted normal, and that made me believe TNA, that made me believe New Japan was real. TNA did a lot of that in the early days of their promotion. They would have segments, they would have promos where the wrestlers were in persona, usually outside in the ring, but backstage they would have interviews where they're talking normally and even talking more about real life. So yeah, they made me believe wrestling was real. It wasn't until I watched more MMA and watched the late Kimbo Slice's street fights, where I finally learned that all wrestling is worked, that all professional wrestling is worked. Because here you have wrestlers being able to go 20 to almost 60 minutes, 20 to 40 minutes with full contact, with no protective gear, or rounds or round stoppages, in between breaks, can go that long, in a match. But yet you're watching Kimbo Slice's street fights, his first couple of street fights, which were in the neighborhood. He destroyed the guys in a couple of seconds. And a lot of MMA fights were like that too. Then, of course, with his longest one being against a former MMA fighter himself, Sean Gannon, who I think is now a police officer, this lasted 11 minutes. His longest fight. But you see how wrestlers on television, you having these long, drawn out fights. But you see these real fights ending quickly, unless the two guys really are that good. And like I said, then there's round stoppages. But you're trying to convince wrestlers with no protective gear can go non-stop, and some of them can go non-stop. But that's when I learned that all wrestling was what's called. And that kind of, and see, when the TNA wrestlers and I thought Japan, I thought the 70s, I thought the 80s was good with Hulk Hogan. I thought the 70s and 80s was good with top stars. Antonio Inoki, Akira Maida, Junichi Tenryu, Satoru Sayama, the original Tiger Mask. There were four incarnations of the Tiger Mask with I like each incarnation, but my favorites are probably the first and the fourth one currently. The fourth one, the most recent, well, actually, there's a new Tiger Mask, but before that there was Tiger Mask 4, who's like in his late 40s now. The original Tiger. So yeah, seeing guys like in Dynamite Kid, his stuff in New Japan, Dynamite Kid, Bret Hart has stopped here. So yeah, I thought the 80s were the best. The 90s were pretty good too, but I thought the 80s were better. The 90s were pretty good with Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Ultimo Dragon, Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, Renegade Rick Williams, Perry Saturn, Scott Norton. But I thought the 80s were much better. Then of course you got the 2000s, which I thought was even better with new rising star Hiroshi Tanahashi, other top stars from the 90s like Hiroyoshi Tenzin, Mashiro Chono, who him and Great Muta by this point were still going strong. So was Scott Norton. I mentioned Tony Hung previously, and of course Brock Lesnar when he left Brock Lesnar and A-Train, Giant Bernard when they left WWE. Then of course the TNA wrestlers, Kurt Angle, AJ Styles, who had a phenomenal match with Tanahashi. Those guys. So in the 2010s, this is when it really became good. But this is when I kind of stopped watching. I stopped watching when the TNA guys. Tomko, he was another guy who was barely in WWE, but he was so awesome in TNA and in New Japan Pro Wrestling. When those guys stopped appearing, I kind of stopped caring about Japanese wrestling. That's when it really got good, because that's when Prince Devitt, he's now Finn Balor in WWE, that lame gimmick, but he was awesome in Japan as Prince Devitt, as the real as the mastermind behind the now legendary stable Bullet Club, which has revolutionized Japanese wrestling and made New Japan even better. See, New Japan is all about fighting spirit. So even the bad guys fight fair and square. They may use a couple of dirty maneuvers in the ring, but they don't do other stuff like distract the referee or have guys interfering on their behalf. It's all about fighting spirit and who's the toughest fighter. Who's the toughest fighter in Japanese wrestling. And Here you have the Bullet Club stable, which is using cliches that are synonymous with American wrestling and that are synonymous with American wrestling, such as distracting the referee and having multiple wrestlers interfere and doing all sorts of illegal stuff in in um in matches. And even Kevin Nash is putting them over. One of the things I love about the Bullet Club, they were, like I said, they were more an athletic version of NWO and DX, and the lineup was good. You had AJ Styles. Well, when before Prince Devitt left, after Prince Devitt left, you had AJ Styles, Machine Gun Carl Anderson, Doc Gallows, Tonga, Bad Luck Fail, Cody Hall, Scott Hall's son, and of course the Young Bucks, and finally Kenny Omega, which this led to Okada, man. Okada, like I said, Hiroshi Tanahashi and Okada have been my opinion, the best um the best faces of New Japan Pro Wrestling in a while, since Inoki and the original Tiger Mask and Maida. So they have been the best faces of New Japan in a long time. But Okada, I saw him years ago in TNA as the Pope's Kato, as the Pope's assistant. Kato. Now he's the top star in Japan, the top star who was battling the Bullet Club night in and night out. Then in the 2000s, I saw the rise of Hiroshi Tanahashi, who I first saw him in TNA. He briefly appeared in TNA in 2006. Then he later left to wrestle for New Japan full time. And then I got to see him. And then I got to see him and AJ Styles wrestle a match in New Japan when TNA invaded New Japan. They had a phenomenal match. And then of course now he's the top star there. In his more recent fight with Tetsuya Naito, who is also pretty awesome. Despite that being a scripted match, man, I was hugely angry. I was actually angry that I was hugely into the story that these guys were told. I was hugely angry that Tanahashi did not leave with the title belt. But like I said, man, New Japan is awesome. New Japan now, with the roster they have now, they're even better than they've ever been. In the past with the roster they have now. Look at this roster. I mentioned Kazuhiko Okada, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Tomoki Hanma, who I've often confused, who I confused with Okada, but he's much older than Okada. He's like 40 years old. He's much older than Okada, and instead of and he uses the flying headbutt as his finisher. But yeah, Tomoki Hanma, Tomohiro Ishii, my opinion, like I said, the toughest guy in New Japan. Then of course you got other mainstays like the legendary Yuji Nagata, who I was introduced to him through the WCW versus NWO Revenge game. That was WCW '97 when he was feuding with Ultimo Dragon in WCW. Yuji Nagata, probably like the best wrestler, one of the best wrestlers and fighters there, because this guy's actually fought for real in the Pride. He fought Fedor and Crow Cop in Pride fighting championships. Yuji Nagata, Hiroshi Tenzin, Jushin Liger, Tiger Mask 4, then of course Tetsuya Naito, then of course the various Gaijin wrestlers, like I mentioned, the Young Bucks, Kyle O'Reilly of Red Dragon, Adam Cole, now Cody Rhodes, who made his debut at Wrestle Kingdom 11, CJ Juice Robinson, who is of course CJ Parker from NXT, who wrestled Cody in his debut match at Wrestle Kingdom, Tonga Roa, the Gorillas of Destiny, and then of course Bad Luck Fail, and of course and of course, and of course, um, Kenny Omega, who another guy. This guy was just a mid Carter in Ring of Honor, a mid Carter in Ring of Honor. He wasn't even the top there in Ring of Honor, and is now like the top heel in New Japan. When that was hilarious and awesome when AJ Styles left for WWE, when the Bullet Club beat him up and kicked him out of the group, and now he it was rumored that he would now challenge for the Junior Heavyweight Championship. He was like, nah, I'm challenging for that IWPG Heavyweight Championship, man. Beat AJ Styles' butt and kicked him out of the group and took his place as the top top heel of New Japan. And then you saw the feud between him and Okada, which this feud had been pretty much building for like several months. I think since October, I think since November. I think it was the King of Road show. Since the King of Road show from last year, this feud had been building. This feud had been building and finally culminated in a phenomenal fight in what is already a match of your candidate at Wrestle Kingdom 11, which is one of the best shows I've seen, man. I'm still talking about that show, still watching stuff from that show I liked, and that's already the best show of this year. New Japan right now, currently, in my opinion, is the best. Well, alongside CMLL, is the best professional wrestling company this year, man. This year, last year TNA was the best wrestling show on TV, and it probably still is because it's the only one that's on actual television. But New Japan right now is the better company in 2017. I'm still talking about that phenomenal Wrestle Kingdom 11 show, and I can't wait for the next New Japan major pay-per-view. One thing I don't like about New Japan, I mentioned in the last video, I mentioned the wrestling, how it's not real enough despite the intensity. I love the intense fighting, but the wrestling itself is not real. Matches go on way too long. But the other thing I like about New Japan is their television product. Besides the pay-per-views, which are phenomenal, they do pay-per-view way better than any other. They do pay-per-view way better than any other company I can name up besides CMLL, the AAA promotion, and maybe TNA. Maybe TNA promotion is so much better than WWE. I don't even care about WWE this year. It's Royal Rumble, WrestleMania season, two of my favorite pay-per-views from WWE, and I really don't care. I really don't care. Like going back to their television product, the television show New Japan Pro Wrestling is just a show featuring tape matches. Can't believe I'm saying it, but that's right there is worse than WWE, because in WWE their shows are terrible, but at least you get stuff as it actually happened, or was being taped. You get a show with tape matches from various shows from the year, and they put together on a wrestling show called by JR and Matt Striker. Who wants to see who the hell wants to see that? And how will that compete or make New Japan bigger, which their plan is to become global in 2017. They're even trying now to become a competitor to WWE due to WWE trying to expand their market there, something like that. Yeah, so New Japan has been awesome. Best product right now currently in 2017, and Wrestle Kingdom 11 is already one of the best shows of this year, and Kenny Omega and Okada, best match of the night. Well, this was my salute of New Japan Pro Wrestling. Going to be talking about the other Japanese wrestling promotions. All right, I'm done, people.